Everyone thinks they understand what a taxi driver really does. They picture simple routes, quiet passengers, and long nights with nothing but headlights for company. But the drivers who live this job know a different truth, one they rarely say out loud. Their stories bend in strange directions, shaped by people who appear then vanish, voices that do not match the faces in the back seat, and moments that stay with them long after the engine stops. These are the things they talk about only when the car is off and the road finally lets go. Listen to them speak for themselves.
I've worked as a taxi driver for 8 years, mostly night shifts. Nights fit me. The streets thin out, the chatter dies, and the city drops its polite mask. My shift usually starts at 10. I check the tires, wipe the windshield, toss my thermos into the cup holder, and pull out into roads that look wider than they do in daylight. There is a stretch of road near the river where the lamps flicker no matter how often the city repairs them. I always notice it. Something about that faint stutter in the light feels wrong, like the dark is reclaiming the space inch by inch. One night in early autumn, the air had that stiff chill that sneaks in before winter really arrives. It was around 2 in the morning when the dispatcher sent me a pickup request. The location caught my eye: Maple Bridge, midpoint. That alone made me sit back in my seat. No one waits at the midpoint of that bridge. It's narrow, windy, and loud from the river below. People wait at either end where the sidewalks are wider and the lights actually work. Still, it was a call like any other. I drove up the ramp, tires humming on the cold pavement. The bridge was empty. My headlights swept over the railing and the asphalt, showing nothing but concrete and the fog building near the water. I pulled to the side, hazard lights blinking. The radio crackled. "Passenger should be right there," the dispatcher said. I told him I didn't see anyone. He repeated the address like I had misread it. I waited. The river roared softly beneath me, a low repeating note that felt too steady, like it didn't match the rest of the world. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting someone to appear from the fog. After maybe 30 seconds, I heard it, a click. The back door latch. Light, quick, the exact sound it makes when someone tries the handle but doesn't pull hard enough to open it.
He twisted in my seat.
Nothing. Just my empty back seat and streetlights flickering overhead. I set my palm against the fabric of the seat to feel if there was any shift in weight. The cushion was cold and flat. I told myself the cold must have tightened the metal in the latch. It was the first explanation that came to mind, and I held onto it like a rope. Still, I got out and checked. I circled the car, leaned over the bridge rail, glanced along the road. No footsteps, no shape in the fog. My breath left faint trails in front of me, and for a moment I had the odd sense that someone else's breath was hanging near mine, just out of sight, like a second cloud fading a beat too late. I climbed back into the driver's seat. I should have left right then, but I hesitated. That's when I heard a new sound. This time it wasn't the latch. It was coming from inside the car. A soft shift of fabric in the back seat. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the subtle cue of someone adjusting how they sit. I froze. Every muscle locked up. I didn't turn around. I just stared at the cracked line of light coming from the bridge lamp above me. The air inside the car felt warmer than it had a moment before. Not comfortable warmth. The kind that comes from shared space. From breath. From presence. I forced myself to speak. If someone got in while I stepped out, just let me know where you're going. My voice sounded wrong in the small cabin. Too thin. Too careful. The silence that followed was thicker than anything I've sat in before. I put the car in gear and rolled forward a few meters. The sound stopped. The air cooled again. I checked the app. A new request had popped up from across town. I took it, grateful for an excuse to move, and pulled away from the bridge. When I reached the next red light, I glanced in the mirror. Something small caught my eye. The middle seat belt in the back was buckled. I never buckle that one. It's always loose, hanging off to the side. I told myself a hard turn must have swung it in place, even though that never happens. The next morning, when I returned the car to the garage, Another driver was sitting on a crate smoking a cigarette. He saw me looking at the riverside grime on the bumper and said, "You had a pickup near Maple Bridge last night, didn't you?" I asked how he knew.
Et lågt à short, unease log.
Because every time they send me there, I swear someone climbs in without opening the door. He meant it as a joke, but his eyes didn't match the tone. I didn't tell him about the latch or the seatbelt or the sound of fabric moving. I still drive across Maple Bridge because it's part of my route. But now, every time I roll onto that narrow midpoint, I check the mirror twice. And I always glance at that middle belt, waiting to see if it has chosen a position on its own.
I've been driving taxis for 5 years, mostly during the evening shift. That's the time of day when the city starts losing definition. Lights smear across the glass, voices fade into alleyways, and the whole place feels like it's preparing for something it won't name. I always start the same way. Check the mirror, warm up the engine, take a slow breath, and remind myself not to overthink the things I see after dark. The night this happened, Hillcrest Station was drowning in fog. Not thick enough to block vision, but enough to blur shapes into half-formed outlines. People moved through it like shadows that hadn't finished deciding on a human shape. My app pinged with a request right outside the station. I pulled up to the curb and spotted her instantly. A woman in a pale gray coat, standing too straight under a flickering lamp. She didn't look at the car before getting in. She just opened the door and settled into the back seat without a word. I asked for her destination. Nothing. She raised one hand and pointed straight ahead. Her fingers shook slightly, like she was cold or fighting off a tremor. That kind of silence doesn't throw me anymore, so I pulled away from the station and followed the main road. The tires hissed softly on the wet pavement. Every time I checked the mirror, she was staring at the side window with an intent that unsettled me. Not watching the scenery. Not scanning for landmarks. Just staring, as if she expected something to appear on the other side of the glass. The reflection on the window didn't help. Her face looked too still, too blank, as if the reflection wasn't sure how to imitate her. When we reached the first intersection, I asked again where she wanted to go. In the mirror, her eyes didn't flicker. She lifted her hand again and pointed left. I turned. Another block. She pointed right. Slowly, the path she chose stopped resembling any normal route. It was like she was following an invisible thread through the streets, tugging me along behind it. The area changed around us. Streetlights thinned out. The buildings lost their neat lines and sagged against each other like tired old men. Windows looked darker than they should have, even with light shining near them. The kind of dark that feels like it absorbs whatever touches it. Her breathing changed too. It slowed down until each inhale sounded deliberate. She clutched her hands together in her lap, squeezing them tight enough that I could see her knuckles whiten in the rear view. When she pointed again, she had to steady her own wrist with her other hand. I don't know why, but the sight of that shook me more than anything else. We rolled into a narrow side street where the trees arched over the road and blocked most of the sky. She pointed toward a house halfway down the block. The place looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. No light. No furniture near the windows. The porch roof slanted downward in a way that made the house look tired or ashamed. I parked at the curb and waited for her to move. For a moment, she sat completely still. Then she whispered 2 words. "Don't wait." Her voice was thin, scraped raw, like someone who had been silent for too long. She opened the door gently, stepped into the cold air, and walked up the path. But instead of knocking, she stopped at the door and faced it. Just stood there. Not shifting. Not breathing deeply. Just holding herself in place, as if expecting something inside to make the next move. I pulled away slowly. I couldn't take my eyes off the mirror. She stayed perfectly still, framed by the broken porch and the faint fog. Only when the road curved and I lost sight of her did I realize my hands were shaking on the wheel. When I checked the app, the ride hadn't registered. It still said awaiting passenger. No distance tracked. No time logged. I tried to end it, but the system froze until I restarted it. The next afternoon, I drove back to that street. I told myself it was just curiosity, but it felt more like unfinished business pulling at me. In daylight, the house looked worse. Weather beaten. Boards loose. The yard gate hanging by one hinge. A man across the road was trimming a hedge, and I asked him who lived there. "No one," he said. "Hasn't been anyone since the fire. They boarded it up after the back roof collapsed." I asked if he had seen anyone standing at the door recently. He paused. "Not long, but long enough to notice." "Once or twice," he said. "Late. Never stays long." I didn't ask him to describe who he saw. I didn't want to know. Since that night, whenever a silent passenger points instead of speaking, something in me tenses. I remember the way she stared at the window, not at the world outside, but at something I couldn't see. And sometimes, when the car goes too quiet, I catch myself listening for that slow, deliberate breathing. The kind that isn't trying to calm down. The kind that's waiting.
I have been driving taxis long enough to know when something feels off. Most nights follow a predictable rhythm. Bars close, factories empty, couples argue in the back seat, and by 3 in the morning the city feels hollow. My routine is simple. Start the engine. Check the meter. Tell myself that whatever strange thing I might see tonight will probably have an ordinary explanation by sunrise. But one shift didn't follow any pattern I knew. It felt like I kept circling the same moment, like the night was stuck in place. It began around 11. A storm had passed earlier, leaving damp air and puddles that reflected the streetlights in shaky patterns. I had just dropped off a fare and was heading toward the main road when the app pinged a request. The pickup spot made me pause. Dane and Willow. A small intersection with a blinking red light that always seems half a beat out of sync. I had picked up there many times, but rarely at that hour. When I arrived, the intersection was empty. Not just quiet. Empty in a way that made me check twice. No parked cars, no stray animals, no movement behind the fences. Just a tipped grocery cart leaning on its side like it had been there for months. After waiting a minute, I assumed the passenger left and canceled the call. I barely made it 2 blocks before the app pinged again. Same location. Same precise pin placement. I turned around, expecting to see someone waving this time. But when I arrived, the intersection looked exactly the same. Same silence. Same tipped cart. Same off-tempo blink of the red light. I waited, feeling the hairs on my arms lift. After maybe 20 seconds, I heard something behind me. 2 soft taps on the trunk. Quick. Light. Too deliberate to be wind or debris. I turned around fast, expecting a person walking up. Nothing. The street was still empty, and mist was crawling over the pavement like low smoke. I got out and checked the trunk. The metal was dry. No branches nearby. No one hiding behind the fence. When I looked down, the gravel around my tires hadn't shifted. No footprints except my own. I felt a pressure at the back of my neck, like someone was standing too close, but when I spun around, it was just mist and the steady blink of the red light. I brushed off the feeling, climbed into the car, and drove away again. I told myself it was a coincidence, a glitch, anything. But the nervous twist in my stomach didn't leave. 15 minutes passed. Another request came in. I didn't even need to look. I already knew. Dane and Willow. I stared at the screen. The request icon pulsed slowly like it was breathing. I didn't accept it right away. I didn't reject it either. It just stayed there waiting. Most nights I try to play it cool, but that moment rattled me. Eventually, I accepted the ride, telling myself that maybe I had scared myself into imagining things. The closer I got, the more the air changed. Thickened. As if the night didn't want me moving through it. By the time I reached the intersection, the fog had built into a low blanket that clung to the ground. My headlights didn't cut through it so much as push it aside. I stopped the car. The blinking light flickered in the mist. The grocery cart was still tipped exactly the same way. And before I could even take a full breath, the back door latch snapped upward. Not a jiggle. A full lift. Like someone pulling it with intention. The lock held, but the sound went straight to my spine. I didn't turn around. Something in me refused. I kept my eyes on the windshield, hands steadying against the wheel. A moment later, the radio cracked with static. I reached for the volume, but then a voice pushed through. It was my dispatcher's, but strained. Flattened. Like someone had played it through an old tape. Pickup confirmed, it said. Nothing else. I pulled off the cab without checking the mirror. I didn't care if the ride was registered or not. When I ended my shift and checked the trip log, every ride showed up except the 3 from Dane and Willow. No canceled calls. No completed ones. Just a long empty gap where the time should have been. As if someone had erased the section of the night I kept driving into. I told myself I would avoid that intersection forever. I even added a custom no-go zone in the app. But sometimes, when the night gets too still, I swear I hear that soft double tap again. Not loud. Almost polite. Like someone reminding me that I came back more than once. And that they're waiting to see if I'll come back again.
I have been a taxi driver for over a decade, and in that time I learned that every job has rules you never see in the handbook. Some are harmless, like avoiding certain parking lots because the security guards are cranky. Others are heavier. The kind that no one explains out loud but everyone follows anyway. My shift starts in the late afternoon, and I usually catch the evening crowd before sinking into the deeper hours of the night. I know the shortcuts, the alleys, the best gas station to grab quick coffee. But there is one street I always avoid after dark.
Bentham Street.
It's not dangerous.
No gangs, no trouble.
But every driver I know keeps their distance after 10. No one said why. No one had to. The night this happened, the air felt swollen with humidity from a storm earlier. The windows fogged easily. My tires made soft hissing sounds on the damp road. Around midnight, the request slowed, and I found myself drifting toward the quieter neighborhoods. The app pinged. Pickup location, Bentham Street. The exact address hovered for a moment before I recognized it. A narrow block not far from a row of old duplexes. Instinct told me to decline it. But the fare was decent.
Long distance. And curiosity always gets louder when the night gets quiet.
I accepted. The street was dimmer than usual. Bentham never had good lighting, but that night the lamps felt weaker, as if someone had draped thin cloth over the bulbs. The houses looked closer together, almost leaning toward the road. I pulled up to the address. No one stood outside. Not unusual. People order rides from inside all the time. I waited. I watched the windows. Most were dark. One on the second floor had curtains drawn tightly enough to hide any movement. I checked the app. Passenger is approaching. But the sidewalk was empty.
No footsteps.
No shadow shifting behind the curtain. I kept the doors locked.
A minute passed.
Then something tapped the front passenger window.
Light. Präzise.
Like a fingertip. I turned, expecting to see someone standing right there. But no one was close enough to touch the glass. A man walked his dog half a block away. A porch light flickered on 2 houses down. But no one near my window. The app still said, passenger is approaching. Another tap. Same window. Same sound. I leaned over and looked at the glass from up close.
No smudge.
No mark.
No sign of anything.
My stomach tightened. I straightened up, ready to cancel the ride, but the app changed again. Passenger has entered the vehicle. The doors hadn't opened. Every taxi driver knows the sound of a door opening, the shift of weight, the airflow, even the faint creak of the hinges. Nothing had moved. My back seat remained empty. I stared at the app, waiting for it to correct itself.
It didn't.
I tried speaking, feeling foolish but unsure what else to do.
Where to?
Silence filled the car. The kind that eats up all other sound.
No dog barking. No distant traffic.
Even the hum of the engine felt quieter. Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw something that made every muscle in my body lock. The middle seat belt, normally hanging loose, was buckled.
Not tightly, just clipped in.
Like someone had done it casually. I knew for a fact it hadn't been buckled earlier. I always keep them unfastened to avoid rattling noises.
I didn't look back.
Somehow, turning around felt like the wrong move. Instead, I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I didn't ask where to go again. I didn't need to. The app updated automatically, proceed straight. I followed the directions through a series of narrow streets I rarely used. Each turn felt slower than the last. The air inside the car felt heavy, like someone was breathing quietly but steadily. Every time I glanced at the mirror, the seat belt remained buckled, perfectly still, no slack. Eventually, the app told me to stop near a dead-end road behind an abandoned community center. The building was covered in vines, windows darkened with grime. Before I could put the car in park, the app flashed, "Passenger has exited."
The seat belt unbuckled. No sound. No movement.
It simply lay flat against the seat, the metal buckle resting lightly where it always had.
I didn't stay. I didn't wait.
I drove off before the app could update again. My hands shook so hard I had to pull over 2 blocks away just to breathe. When I got home after the shift, I checked the trip log.
Nothing.
No pickup from Bentham Street.
No ride.
No fare. As if the whole thing never happened. The next evening, during our usual meetup at the coffee stand, another driver mentioned Bentham Street in a low voice. "You ever get a request from there?" he asked. I shrugged, not wanting to answer.
He nodded slowly. If you do, don't look back.
And don't open the doors unless you see someone with your own eyes.
That was the rule. The one nobody writes down. I follow it now. Every night.
And I never drive Bentham Street after 10.
I have been a taxi driver long enough to recognize when a ride carries the wrong kind of quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that feels like someone already knows what you are going to say. My shifts usually stretch past midnight, when the road's empty and the air feels heavier. That night started like any other. A few bar runs, a grocery store clerk heading home. Nothing unusual. Then my app pinged with a request from a bus stop at the far edge of the industrial district. The bus line doesn't run after 10, and the stop itself sits beside a row of shuttered warehouses. I almost ignored it, but the fare was long distance and I needed the income. When I pulled up, a man stood beneath the broken shelter light. His posture caught my eye, perfectly straight, arms at his sides, as if he had rehearsed the position. His face was calm, unreadable. No tension, no impatience, just stillness. He entered the back seat without hesitation. No gelo. No fumbling with pockets. He sat with his hands placed neatly on his knees, watching me in the mirror with an expression that didn't shift. "Where to?" I asked. He gave an address in a tone so flat and exact that it felt memorized. I pulled away, telling myself he was just a precise person. Some passengers speak like that. But at the first turn, he said something that tightened my grip on the wheel. "You take Willis Avenue from here." It wasn't a question. It sounded like a fact. I frowned slightly, trying not to show it. Willis Avenue is the fastest route, but I don't take it every time. And I had never seen him before. Drivers remember faces, especially ones that sit as still as he did. "You must know the area," I said. He didn't answer. His eyes followed the passing streetlights as if he expected them to signal something to him. When I turned onto Willis Avenue, he spoke again. Same steady voice. "You slow down near the third light. You always do." I swallowed. I do slow down at that light, not consciously, just a habit after watching too many drivers blow through yellow signals late at night. But there was no way he should have known that. I checked the mirror. He wasn't leaning forward. He wasn't smirking, just watching me, quiet, too quiet. How do you know my routes? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. He blinked once. You take them often, at this hour. Something about his answer didn't sound right. I don't drive that part of town consistently, and certainly not at the exact minute he mentioned. We reached the third light, turned yellow then red. As we slowed, he leaned forward just slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough to let his voice fall closer to my ear. You pause here even when it's green. I hadn't realized I held my breath every time I approached that intersection. I didn't know where I learned the habit. Before I could respond, he added, "Do you remember why?" A thin wave of cold rolled through me. No. Why would there be a reason? He didn't answer. He simply leaned back again, eyes on the road behind us now, as if something in the mirror mattered more to him than the street ahead. A moment later, he gave a new address. Closer. I turned onto a narrow street lined with houses pressed too tightly together. Their windows were dark, curtains drawn as if the whole neighborhood was asleep at once. "Stop here," he said. I pulled up in front of a house with no lights, no car in the driveway, no sign of anyone living there. The curtains looked thick enough to keep anything from seeing in or out. "This is where you should stop," he added quietly. I checked the mirror again. The back seat was empty. He was gone. No door sound. No shift in weight. The locks were still engaged. Only one thing was different. A back seat belt, unused all night, sat neatly buckled. My hands trembled. I unlocked the doors on instinct. Nothing moved. The street didn't even breathe. I drove off fast, refusing to glance at the mirrors again. Later, when I checked the app, no ride was logged. No name, no route, no fare. But the next night, around the same hour, a new request appeared. Same bus stop, same pin location. I didn't accept it, and I don't slow down at that third light anymore.
I have driven taxis long enough to know that mistakes feel sharper at night. A wrong turn doesn't just feel wrong. It feels like the road is waiting to punish you for it. Most drivers joke about night rules that only apply after midnight, but there is truth behind them. When the rest of the city sleeps, the small things you overlook become the things that stay with you. This happened on a Thursday toward the end of a long shift. The rain had stopped earlier, leaving the streets coated with a glossy layer that caught every light like a mirror that wasn't fully dry. My eyelids felt heavy. I was at that fragile point where your vision blurs around the edges if you stare too long at a traffic signal. A request came through from a small apartment complex near the river. I knew the place. Quiet, older buildings, nothing special. I pulled into the front lot. Usually, someone stands under the awning or leans on the railing while finishing a call. But the entryway was empty. No movement in any of the windows. I honked lightly. Nothing. The app said, "Passenger will meet you outside." I waited another minute. Still nothing. I was about to cancel the ride when something made me pause. The back seat belt behind the passenger seat was buckled. I froze. I check those belts constantly because they rattle against the door latch if they're left loose. And I knew I had left all of them unbuckled at the start of the shift. I didn't turn around. I don't know why. Some things feel safer when you only see them through the mirror's edges. I checked the locks. All still engaged. Then the app updated. Passenger on board. My heart thudded once hard. I kept staring at the glowing screen. My hand hovered over the cancel button, but something inside me whispered that canceling might be the wrong choice. So I played along. Where to? I asked the empty cabin. The app selected a destination on its own, not the passenger. The app, a neighborhood on the opposite side of the city, one I rarely visited. Long, quiet streets. Houses set too far back from the road. I hesitated but shifted into drive. The warmth in the cabin changed the moment the wheels began to move, almost like someone behind me had exhaled. I followed the directions. At each turn, I felt that faint warmth drift slightly, as if adjusting to the motion. No sound, no breathing I could pinpoint, just a shift in the air that didn't belong there. Halfway across the city, I made the mistake that still bothers me. The normal route was blocked by roadwork. I tried to take a shortcut through a neighborhood I barely knew. The GPS recalculated, flickered, then froze completely. The map disappeared, leaving only a blank white grid. I tapped the screen. No response. A thin pressure gathered behind me. Not pain, not movement, just an awareness that felt like my body wanted to turn around even though my mind refused to let it. I pulled over under a broken street lamp and restarted the system. While it loaded, I checked the mirror. That was my second mistake. I didn't see anyone, but the second rear seat belt, the one behind the driver's side, was now buckled. The cabin stayed silent. The air didn't move. But the moment I saw that second belt clipped in, something inside my chest tightened like a rope being pulled. The GPS rebooted. When it came back online, the route had changed. Not to the destination, to the origin. The apartment complex. I whispered, "You want to go back?" My voice shook. The warmth behind me shifted again, subtle but clear, like someone adjusting their posture. I put the car into drive and followed the new route. The deeper I went into the empty streets, the lighter the air became, as if whatever had been waiting was easing its hold. When I pulled into the apartment lot, the app chimed twice. Drop-off complete. At that exact moment, both seat belts unbuckled. Not loudly, almost silently. I didn't hear metal hit plastic. I only saw the change when I risked a glance in the mirror. They were lying exactly where they had been at the start of my shift. I didn't wait for another update. I drove off fast enough that my tires spit water behind me. I didn't pick up another fare. I didn't even check the app until I got home. When I finally opened the trip log, the ride was missing. No pickup time. No drop-off. Not even a canceled attempt. Just 27 minutes of empty space in the timeline. I told myself it was exhaustion, a system error, a hallucination from driving too long. But the next morning, when I reached behind the seat to grab my jacket, the cushion felt slightly warm, as if someone had been sitting there not long before. Now I never take shortcuts after midnight. Not even small ones. Not even if the road is empty. Especially then.
I have been a taxi driver for 14 years, and despite everything the night has shown me, I still try to be decent to people. You see things on these roads. Things that make you colder without realizing it. So whenever a passenger seems lost or tired or scared, I try to help in small ways. A warm tone. A patient wait. A moment of kindness that doesn't cost much. One night, I learned that even kindness feels different after midnight. It was just past 3 in the morning when I got a request from a narrow side street near Harbour Line. The area is mostly duplexes and silent front yards, the kind of place where even the wind moves quietly. My shift had been long, and I was planning to head home soon, but the request was close and the fare was good. I pulled up to the address. A lone street lamp buzzed overhead, barely cutting through the darkness. A girl stood at the curb. Younger than I expected, maybe in her early 20s. She wore a thin sweater, her hair pulled into a messy knot, and she stayed hunched in a way that made her look smaller than she was. She didn't wave. She didn't look up. She just got into the back seat slowly, like every movement needed thought. "You all right?" I asked. She nodded, but it seemed more like she was agreeing with herself, not me. Her hands were shaking slightly. I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or something else. "Where to?" I asked. She gave an address near the north side. Her voice was soft, like someone speaking after crying for a long time. As we pulled away, I kept an eye on her through the mirror. Her posture didn't change. She stared at her own hands the whole time, fingers interlaced so tightly the knuckles turned pale. I tried not to pry. Sometimes people just need a quiet ride home. But a few minutes later, she whispered, "Thank you for stopping." "Of course," I said. "You called the ride." Another small nod. Not quite agreeing, not quite denying. Just acknowledging sound. About halfway through the trip, we passed under a brighter section of road. For the first time, I saw her face clearly in the mirror. Her eyes were tired, red along the edges. Her expression didn't match her age. It looked worn down, almost fragile. I slowed at a yellow light, and she whispered again. "I didn't think anyone would come." I tried to give her a reassuring smile. This late, drivers are always trying to squeeze in one last fare. "You got lucky tonight." The way her shoulders stiffened told me she didn't agree. I let it go. As we continued, she shifted a little closer to the middle seat. Not toward me, just toward the open space, like she needed distance from the door. I noticed her sweater sleeve had a tear near the wrist, the fabric frayed in a way that looked old rather than recently ripped. I kept quiet. I didn't want to make her more uncomfortable. We reached her street sooner than I expected. It was darker than the others, the houses spaced farther apart. Most porch lights were off. Her destination appeared as a small single-story home with a cracked walkway and tall hedges crowding the sides. "You sure this is the place?" I asked gently. She nodded again. But for the first time, she lifted her eyes toward the window. Not to look at the house. To look at her own reflection in the glass. The sight of it made my stomach tighten. Her expression wasn't fear exactly. It was something closer to resignation. "Do you want me to wait until you get inside?" I asked. A simple kindness. Something I've done dozens of times. She looked at the house, then at her hands again. "No," she whispered. "You've done enough." I unlocked the doors. She didn't move at first. She sat perfectly still for a full 5 seconds, like she was preparing herself for something. Then she opened the door slowly and stepped out. She didn't hurry. She didn't look back. She walked up the path with small, measured steps. When she reached the porch, she paused. Not in hesitation. More like she was listening to something inside. Then the porch light flicked on. Not bright. Just a weak bulb that buzzed with uneven electricity. She opened the door and slipped inside quickly. The light flickered again, then went out completely. I waited a few seconds, even though she told me not to. Something about the moment made me want to make sure she was safe. But nothing moved behind the curtains. No light returned. Finally, I pulled away. Halfway down the block, my app chimed. Passenger cancelled ride. I froze. I hadn't noticed any cancellation earlier. Yet the trip was gone from the log, erased as if it never started. When I checked the back seat, the fabric was still slightly warm. I don't know why that part stays with me. Now, when someone thanks me for stopping, I always listen closely to how they say it. Sometimes gratitude sounds like relief. But sometimes it sounds like a warning.
I have been driving long enough to hear every rumor that floats through late-night taxi stands. Most of them are jokes, small exaggerations built to pass the time. But there is one story drivers whisper only after the lot has gone quiet. A story about a street no one wants to admit they avoid. I used to brush it off as superstition. Until the night I realized every rumor starts somewhere. My shift that night was slow. No events in town, no bar rush, just a steady drip of short rides. Around 1 a.m, I stopped at a gas station to grab a coffee. 2 other drivers were there, leaning against their cars, talking in low voices. I heard just enough to recognize the name. Creston Lane. I knew the street. Narrow, lined with old duplexes and one abandoned office building. Nothing special. But the driver spoke with a tension that made me curious. When they noticed me listening, they stopped talking altogether. That alone bothered me more than whatever rumor they were trading. I shrugged it off and went back on the road. An hour later, my app pinged. Of course, Creston Lane. The timing felt too precise to ignore. Maybe the universe has a sense of humor, or maybe my night was simply overdue for something strange. I accepted the ride. I shouldn't have. The lane was darker than usual. A low layer of fog hovered just above the pavement, almost thin enough to ignore but not quite. The houses were silent. Even the trees were still. I pulled up to the address. A duplex I had seen many times in daylight but barely recognized now. The porch light flickered without fully turning on, like it couldn't decide what side of the night it was on. No one waited outside. I checked the app. Passenger approaching. I looked around. No footsteps. No movement. Nothing but the thinning buzz of the dying porch bulb. I kept my doors locked and watched the sidewalks carefully. Then I noticed something odd. A curtain on the second floor shifted just a little, like someone inside had been watching and stepped away. That wasn't strange on its own. What unsettled me was that the shadow that moved across the curtain didn't match a person's height or shape. It was too narrow, too angled, too quick. I rubbed my eyes. Long shift, tired brain. I tried to shake it off. Another minute passed. Still no passenger. The app updated again. Passenger in vehicle. My skin tightened. I hadn't heard the door open. I checked the locks. Still engaged. I checked the mirror, carefully. The back seat looked empty, but the air felt wrong. Warmer than it should have been. As if someone had sat down a moment earlier and was now sitting perfectly still. I swallowed hard and forced myself to breathe normally. Where to? I asked. Silence. Then the app blinked and filled in the destination automatically. Not chosen. Filled in. A dead-end stretch behind the old office building 2 blocks down. I drove slowly. Every streetlight cast long streaks across the hood. The warmth in the back seat pulsed faintly, rising and falling like shallow breathing. I tried not to think about it. When I turned onto the dead end, I stopped near the cracked loading dock. The building looked hollow, windows dark and lifeless. The fog seemed thicker here. The porch light from earlier flickered again in my memory. Something about its pace. Its hesitation. The app chimed. Passenger dropped off. I didn't hear any movement. But the warmth in the back seat weakened, like a presence pulling away slowly until the cabin felt cold again. I checked the mirror. The seat belt, the middle one, was folded neatly across the cushion. Not fastened. Place. I locked the doors with shaking hands. I didn't stay to see if anything else happened. At the end of my shift, I returned to the gas station. The same 2 drivers were still there. One of them looked at me and immediately knew where I had been. He didn't ask. He didn't joke. He just said, "It finds the tired ones." I asked what that meant. He shook his head. They say a driver started the rumor years ago. Someone who kept getting rides from Creston Lane that never showed up in his logs. He stopped driving not long after. Checked my app. No ride from Creston Lane. No timestamp. No drop-off. Just a blank space in the middle of my night. Now when drivers whisper about that street, I don't laugh. I don't join in either. I just listen. Rumors don't start from nothing. And some roads remember more than they should.
I have been a taxi driver for years, and burnout rarely comes from the hours. It comes from the moments you can't explain. The ones that make the road feel unfamiliar. The ones you try to forget but still think about while staring at the ceiling at 5 in the morning. This story happened on a night when I was already stretched thin, running on caffeine and stubbornness more than sleep. It was close to 4 in the morning, the sky still black but softening at the edges. My shift had been slow. A couple of quiet rides.
Long gaps of empty streets. Too much silence for too long should have gone home.
Instead, I told myself I could squeeze out one more fare. That's when the app pinged. Pickup. Lansford Road. I exhaled sharply when I saw the address. Every driver in the city has a place they avoid, and Lansford Road tends to be that place. Not because of crime or accidents. Just stories. Too many drivers reporting pickups that vanish from logs, or passengers who enter without ever opening the door. Most of us avoid late-night requests from that stretch unless the fare is too good to ignore. This one wasn't. I accepted it anyway. The moment I turned onto Lansford, I felt it. The quiet. Not normal quiet. Thick quiet. Air that felt padded, like it was absorbing sound instead of carrying it. The woods on the left side of the road looked darker than usual. The houses on the right were barely shapes in the black. I slowed near the marked pickup point, which sat between two leaning mailboxes. No lights. No porch lamps. No movement. I kept my doors locked and waited. Nothing. Then the app updated. Passenger approaching. I rolled my shoulders back and scanned the tree line. No footsteps. No rustling leaves. Not even a breeze. Just a stillness that made my chest tighten.
A moment later, something pressed ligate against the rear door.
Not a knock. Not a tap. Just pressure, like a palm resting against the metal for half a second. My instinct screamed not to turn around. I stared straight ahead. The app updated again. Passenger in vehicle. My throat tightened. I forced my voice steady. Where to? No answer. But the temperature in the back seat shifted. Not cold. Not warm. Just a change, subtle enough that my skin noticed before my mind did. The app filled in a destination automatically.
A Residential Street miles away.
I put the car in drive. My hands shook a little, so I gripped the wheel tighter. As I drove, the road signs seemed brighter than they should have been. The mirror caught reflections I didn't want to decipher, and the warmth behind me pulsed faintly, not in a rhythmic way, just occasionally enough to remind me I wasn't alone. Halfway through the drive, we passed under a row of streetlights. The first light flickered as we approached, then steadied. The next one did the same, and the next. It felt like the lights were adjusting themselves based on our movement. I kept my focus straight ahead. When I eventually turned onto the residential street, the houses looked like shapes cut out of black paper. No lamps. No curtains glowing from inside. Just darkness pressed against silent structures. The app dinged. Passenger dropped off. My grip on the wheel loosened. The warmth in the back seat faded instantly, replaced with the usual cool air of early morning. I chanced a glance in the mirror. The seat looked normal. Ordinary. Too ordinary. I pulled away and headed for home without accepting another fare. My exhaustion suddenly hit like a wave. Heavy. Physical. The kind that makes your vision blur at the edges. I parked in my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the silence for a full minute before checking the app. The entire ride was gone. No pickup. No drop-off. No route. Just an empty block of time. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. I wanted to blame fatigue, glitches, my imagination. But there was one thing I couldn't explain away. When I took off my jacket, the faint smell of damp earth followed me into the house.
A cell like the woods along Lansford Road.
I hadn't stepped outside the car once on that road. The doors never opened. I nearly quit that morning. I even said it out loud to myself. But quitting felt like admitting something had followed me home, and I couldn't bring myself to give it that kind of power. Now, whenever the app pings Lansford Road, I let the request expire. Some roads don't need you to believe anything. They just wait.
I have been a taxi driver for a long time. Long enough to think I had seen every kind of night. The loud ones. The lonely ones. The slow, stretched out hours when the streets feel like they're holding their breath. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. Not after the strange pickups, the wrong addresses, the silent passengers, the rides that never showed up in my logs. But this one night shifted something in me. Not because it was the scariest, but because it made me realize I had misunderstood my own job. It started just after dusk, when the sky still held a thin streak of blue behind the buildings. I had only been on the road an hour. The city was still awake. Normal sounds, normal people, nothing strange. That's probably why the request didn't bother me at first. Pick up. North Bridge Overlook. A scenic spot, usually empty at night except for teenagers or couples hiding from the world. I drove there expecting to find someone arguing on a phone or waving their arms impatiently. Instead, I saw a man sitting alone on the low concrete barrier near the edge of the overlook. He didn't stand when I pulled up. He didn't lift his head. He just stayed there, elbows on his knees, staring at the river below. The street lamp overhead was dim, but bright enough to show he wasn't drunk or injured. Just motionless. I lowered the passenger window. "You waiting for a taxi?" He nodded without looking up, then stood and walked to the back door with slow, heavy steps. He entered the car normally, no odd pauses, no strange silence. Just a weary posture. The kind you see from people who've had long nights in hospitals, or from those leaving bad news behind them. "Where to?" I asked. He gave an address in a quiet, even voice. A neighborhood 20 minutes away. We pulled out of the overlook, and the city lights spread out below us. Normally that view calms me. That night it didn't. Something felt off, not about him, but about the way he sat. Too still, too centered, as if he didn't want to shift his weight. 5 minutes into the ride, he asked, "Do you drive this area often?" "Pretty often," I said. "Why?" He took a long breath. "Then you must know how quiet it gets at night." "Yeah. You get used to it." He shook his head slowly. "I never got used to silence." His tone wasn't dramatic or emotional. Just honest. I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't say anything. A few minutes later, he spoke again. "You ever notice how some places feel different? Not dangerous. Just different." I gripped the wheel tighter without meaning to. "Sometimes," I admitted. He nodded, as if he expected that answer. "And you go anyway? Because it's your job?" "Pretty much," I said. He leaned slightly forward, not enough to startle me, just enough to catch my eye in the mirror. His face looked tired, but not in a physical way. More like someone carrying something heavy inside. "You drive people where they need to go," he said. "Even when they're quiet. Even when they don't make sense. Even when they don't know what they're supposed to do next." I didn't know what he meant, but the words stuck in the air between us, heavier than they should have been. When we reached his street, I slowed. It was a modest neighborhood, dim but lived in. He gave directions to a specific house at the end of the block. Nothing unusual about it. Porch light on. Curtains drawn. A car in the driveway. I pulled up to the curb and stopped. He didn't move. "You're right?" I asked gently. He stared at the house for a long moment. I wasn't sure I'd make it back here. I waited, sensing something fragile in the moment. Then he whispered, "Thank you for not ignoring the call." I nodded, though he couldn't see it clearly. "Take care of yourself." He opened the door and stepped out. Not hurried. Not afraid. Just relieved. He walked up the path. When he reached the porch, the front door opened before he knocked. A woman stood there, silhouetted by warm light. She looked worried. Then she pulled him into a tight embrace. I didn't stay. I didn't need to. I turned the car around and checked the app. The ride was there. Logged. Normal. No missing segments. No strange gaps. But something in me shifted during that drive. Something quiet but important. I realized I had spent so many nights bracing for what might appear in the backseat that I had forgotten the other truth of this job. Sometimes people call a taxi because they need help getting back to something they almost lost. Sometimes a quiet passenger isn't strange. They're just carrying something heavy that they can't say out loud. And sometimes the creepiest nights remind you what your work is really for. I still see shadows where I don't want to. I still hear things I can't explain. But now, when the app pings, I remember that moments like his exist too. And that's why I haven't quit.